The sky hung heavy and dark over vast swaths of China, Vietnam, and neighbouring lands, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath, waiting. It began quietly, a whisper of wind, a slow drizzle that seemed harmless, almost routine. But beneath this deceptive calm, nature was preparing a fury unlike anything these regions had seen in decades. Meteorologists had warned. The clouds were swollen, pregnant with an unforgiving deluge, fed by a storm system gathering strength over the South China Sea. Yet amid bustling cities and quiet villages, many brushed aside the warnings. The rain would pass, they thought. Life went on. But the rain didn't pass. It fell relentlessly, hour after hour, day after day. Rivers swelled beyond their banks, soil turned to mud, and the ground beneath homes and farms grew unstable. Hidden beneath the surface, ancient earth fissures began to open, creaking under the weight of nature's assault. Then, without warning, disaster struck. A colossal dam, a symbol of human engineering and control over nature, groaned and cracked. The towering wall of water it held back surged forward, an unstoppable tsunami of destruction rushing downstream. Towns that had never faced such a threat were suddenly in the path of annihilation. Simultaneously, far from the rivers, mountainsides saturated with rain began to give way. Landslides thundered down with deafening roars, burying entire communities in mud and rubble. Roads and bridges crumbled, cutting off escape routes and trapping thousands in an ever-worsening nightmare. Across this vast region, chaos erupted. Emergency sirens blared, phones buzzed with urgent alerts, but the scale of the catastrophe was overwhelming. Power grids failed, plunging millions into darkness even as floodwaters rose. Rescue teams mobilized swiftly but faced impossible odds. The air was thick with fear and uncertainty. Families huddled together, clutching children and valuables, torn between the instinct to flee and the terror of what lay beyond. Some found refuge on rooftops and in attics, signaling for help as waters climbed. Meanwhile, social media exploded with raw, unfiltered images. Roads turned to rivers, homes swallowed whole, bridges snapped like twigs. The world watched in disbelief as China's mighty rivers transformed into merciless agents of destruction, and as neighbouring countries faced the same brutal onslaught. Experts spoke urgently about climate change, how warming oceans and shifting weather patterns have turned once rare disasters into terrifying new normals. The question echoed in every newsroom and every frightened heart. Was this just the beginning? As night fell, the rain showed no sign of stopping. The storm's fury was far from spent, and beneath the surface of the floodwaters, the true extent of the disaster was only beginning to emerge. This is the story of a flood that reshaped a region, a story of human courage, nature's wrath, and a world forced to confront an uncertain future. As dawn broke, the full scale of devastation came into harsh, unforgiving focus. What was once bustling streets, glowing marketplaces, and crowded neighbourhoods now lay submerged beneath murky, churning floodwaters. In cities across China's heartland and beyond, rivers that had always been lifelines transformed into deadly monsters, swallowing everything in their path. Beijing, the sprawling capital, found itself fighting a battle against time and tide. Flood barriers creaked under pressure, pumping stations struggled to keep pace with the rising deluge. Entire districts became islands, surrounded by water so deep and fast-moving that even the strongest swimmers were powerless against it. In the suburbs and smaller towns, the disaster was just as catastrophic. Homes built along riverbanks, often passed down through generations, were suddenly swept away in minutes. Roads buckled and cracked, electricity poles toppled, and communications were cut off. People were stranded, trapped on rooftops, clinging to trees, or scrambling to reach higher ground. The roar of emergency sirens blended with the frantic cries for help. Rescue teams worked tirelessly, navigating swift currents in small boats, pulling terrified survivors from the water's grasp. Helicopters hovered over flooded neighbourhoods, dropping supplies and pulling up the most desperate by rope. But resources were stretched thin. Hospitals overflowed, medical supplies dwindled, and shelters burst at the seams. The human toll mounted by the hour, with stories of loss and heartbreak emerging from every corner. In neighbouring Vietnam and parts of India and Indonesia, the same relentless storm system wreaked havoc. Floodwaters inundated rice paddies, destroyed bridges, and forced mass evacuations. Governments scrambled to respond, but the scale was staggering. Millions were affected, and the economic cost would be astronomical. Amid the chaos, the relentless rain showed no sign of abating. Weather stations issued constant warnings of new storm surges and potential dam breaches. The spectre of more landslides loomed, threatening to bury entire villages under tons of earth and debris. Social media became both a lifeline and a source of anguish. Videos circulated of streets turned into raging rivers, families waving desperately from rooftops, and rescue crews battling the elements. The world's eyes were glued to these scenes, a sobering reminder of nature's fury. Experts sounded urgent calls for action, linking this disaster to the accelerating impacts of climate change. Rising sea levels, warmer oceans, and shifting monsoon patterns were creating conditions ripe for more frequent and severe storms. The flood was not just a tragedy, it was a wake-up call. As night fell once more, the floodwaters continued their march, indifferent to human suffering. Cities that had stood for centuries faced an uncertain future, their foundations literally washed away. The question on everyone's mind was no longer if the waters would recede, but what would remain when they finally did. In the face of overwhelming devastation, a powerful thread of hope emerged. The relentless courage of rescuers and ordinary people risking everything to save lives. Across the flooded regions, rescue teams plunged into chaotic waters, navigating submerged streets, collapsed bridges, and unstable terrain. Boats bobbed through neighborhoods, turned into labyrinths of water, their crews scanning frantically for signs of life. Helicopters sliced through dark, storm-laden skies, lowering ropes and life rafts to stranded families clinging to rooftops or precarious high ground. Each mission was a race against time, a battle fought with sweat, grit, and sometimes sheer desperation. Stories of heroism poured in from every direction. In one village, a group of fishermen used their small boats to ferry dozens of elderly residents to safety, even as the waters surged dangerously close. Elsewhere, firefighters braved landslides triggered by relentless rain, digging through mud and debris to reach those trapped beneath fallen trees and shattered homes. Yet the danger was relentless. Sudden aftershocks of landslides buried rescue paths, while the collapse of weakened dams threatened to unleash new torrents. Each new flood surge forced teams to retreat and regroup, pushing the limits of endurance and resolve. Amid the chaos, technology became a crucial ally. Drones equipped with cameras scoured flooded zones, pinpointing survivors and mapping safe routes. Rescue coordination centers worked around the clock, directing resources to the hardest-hit areas and prioritizing evacuations. But it wasn't only professional teams answering the call. Ordinary citizens, driven by desperation and solidarity, joined the rescue efforts. Neighborhood groups formed makeshift flotillas, people shared boats, food, and medical supplies. Social media platforms became hubs for coordinating aid and spreading warnings. Tragically, not all stories had happy endings. Families mourned lost loved ones swept away by the merciless waters. Rescue workers faced heartbreak as they pulled bodies from the flood or failed to reach those in time. The emotional toll on communities and responders alike was immense. This disaster was not just a natural calamity, it was a profound test of human resilience and compassion. In the darkest moments, the spirit of solidarity shone through, illuminating the path toward recovery. As floodwaters continued to rise and the storm showed no signs of relenting, the stakes could not have been higher. The coming days would reveal the full cost of the catastrophe, in lives, homes, and the very fabric of communities.